Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here, the host of the Smart Business Revolution podcast. And I talk, of course, with CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of companies and organizations like YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, LendingTree, OpenTable, Axe Software, and many more. I'm also the co-founder of Rise25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And we've got a great guest for you today. His name is Brendan Dell. He is the author of 12 Immutable Laws of High Impact Messaging, the founder of Spark, a messaging consultancy, which helps some of the world's most amazing, really large companies, some big companies like Expedia and Cvent, and help them with positioning, messaging, and articulating their story. Some of the most successful B2B brands are among his client list. He also is the host of the Hook podcast as well. But first, before we get into this, this episode is brought to you by Rise25 Media, and our mission at Rise25 is to help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. And in this post-COVID world that we're entering into, there's nothing more critically important or valuable, especially if you're a B2B business, than having a podcast, because it is a tool that gets you into conversation with smart people like Brendan, and it also gets you a tool for talking to your best customers, your best clients, and prospects and referral partners and strategic partners. So if you've ever thought about doing a podcast, especially if you have a B2B business, I'm an evangelist for this medium because I've been doing it for 10 years and I absolutely love it. I know you would too. So go to our website, rise25media.com. There's lots of resources there so you can learn about some of the different approaches and strategies, how to make doing a podcast a win-win all around for everyone. And of course, Brendan, I'm excited to have you here because you, a fellow podcaster, see the value of doing a podcast. But in this podcast, we're going to talk about how to position your brand in a post-COVID world, how to prepare for a rebound, because we all know this, we will come out of this, just like we came out of 9/11, we came out of 2008, in the depths of those experiences. People thought we weren't, but we will. And most critically, how to position your company in a way that you are a must-have. So first, let's just start there because, a lot of companies are going to emerge from this and they're going to have the same position, have the same story. They're going to tell the same story. But a lot of times companies need to recognize that their customers are in a different world and the world has changed. So talk a little bit about that philosophy just to tee us off.
So I think in general, the world is changing, right? And the way people buy things is going to be different after COVID. And positioning, I guess to talk foundationally, this is a marketing term. Some people may be familiar with it, some people may not. But positioning is how do you differentiate your company, right? How do you create a space in the market that is uniquely yours versus being seen as another one of those, right? And a lot of companies right now have, one, Me Too strategies, and two, they have strategies that are no longer going to be relevant in a world where everybody is looking at their spend across all categories, consumer and business, and saying, what do I need right now? What can I live without, right? And that's the question we're going to be asking for the next 2 years is we will come out of this, but people are going to ask themselves, what do I need right now? What can I live without? And it's our job as business owners, as marketers, et cetera, to figure out how to make sure we're in the correct category there.
That's great. And so what should we be, let's start with kind of like, how do the companies determine if they have a positioning problem? How do they know if their positioning is off?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different exercises that you can walk through there. But I think the first and most obvious is, can you clearly say what it is that you do? And a lot of people can't answer that question. You go, especially if you talk about software and technology, which is where I do a lot of work. But even you take somebody like an attorney, they'll just say, I'm an attorney. They won't have a clear value prop there for you. So can you clearly answer the question, what do I do in a way that makes people lean in and care?
And that is like the format of, we help or I help blank do blank, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of different ways. So my agency, what we talk about is we create unignorable tech companies, right? That's a really clear position. You can understand what that means. It doesn't require a lot of explanation. Can you say that to someone, have them lean in and care about it? Could your employees answer that question if someone asked them at a party, especially when it comes to technology? I hear so many different people saying, well, it's kind of this thing that kind of does that, right? If your people can't answer that question, you have a positioning problem. Do you get confused looks when you try to explain yourself? Are your competitors distinct where you're another one of those, right? You're just another commodity version of that people where you're just competing on price and maybe time, right? And then I think really important as we go forward now is, are you must have or nice to have given how the world has changed, right? Are people going to be looking at what you sell as something that's mission critical in a world where budgets are being scrutinized? Or are they going to see it as, well, maybe we'll think about that later. Let's table the conversation.
And how do you do that if you feel that what you offer isn't mission critical? Or do you need to change what you're doing? Or is there a way that, I don't know, a donut company can, we were talking beforehand about how we're in kind of a comfort era, especially while people are sheltered at home. But people want comfort. They're kind of nesting. They want to be comfortable, given the negativity and kind of some of the anxiety and fear that's out there. People are spending money on some things that make them feel more comfortable. So how do you position something that's not critical as critical, or should you even be doing that?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I think you have to think about what you're selling and find a way to make it important to people, right? And the framework we use always starts with the best customer, which is who buys from you the most frequently, in the least amount of time. And who is that person, and what do they want? Do they need now? And those are questions you should be able to answer. And I think, all of us are going to be forced to look at our companies and say, are we providing something that people really need now? A donut is an example of something that I think people really will want and need now because it provides comfort.
It's probably an extreme example, but
yeah.
Another great example that you've given in presentations is Drift, the company Drift. So those who don't know that, they do conversational marketing. It's kind of a pop-up AI-powered chat that exists on websites. And on its surface, you might say, okay, that's not critical. So, but maybe that's a better example.
So I think, taking a step back, right? Let's talk about how companies often think about differentiating themselves, right? And I'll draw from big companies, but small companies do this the same way, right? A positioning exercise usually in the past would go like this. You'd be looking to answer these questions. For insert target customer description, our product is a insert product category that provides the following compelling reason to buy. Unlike product alternatives, we've assembled X key features, right? So what you're trying to do is say, we are, for men, we are a razor that provides this compelling reason to buy. And unlike other razors, we have more blades or something, right? Like that's an example. And in software, you can look at a lot of different companies that are looking for white space that way. The problem is now that across all categories, and this is for a variety of reasons. One, entrepreneurship has become the new cool thing. Two, there's been easy access to capital. Three, technology has become more accessible. We see tremendous amounts of crowding in all categories. And so what people used to do is try to find features and benefits white space, say that they were the only ones that could do things. That's no longer effective because it's too easy to replicate features and benefits, right? And people can't sort through them all. So what you need to do now is tell a story, right? And you need to find a way to position yourself, as we're talking about, when you think about the rebound as must have for now. And so the new way to do this, the way that's going to be effective going forward, is to create a story that separates you as one apart rather than another one of those.
That's really interesting. So like in the case of Drift, they're basically positioning themselves against the old way of marketing online. And the old way of marketing was a customer came to a website. They navigated around and eventually found a contact us page, which had a form. They would enter their information. It would generate an email to them and to the company. They'd be entered into the company's CRM. The company would determine if they're qualified, and then they would maybe call them back, maybe not. And it was very slow. It took days or weeks. And then the new way with Drift takes minutes, if not seconds. You can get a response, especially integrating AI. And so basically they're saying like, this is a completely new way. They're not comparing themselves to old forms, other ways of marketing. They're comparing themselves to a new world that we live in, which expects quicker responses. Do I have it right there?
Yeah. So when you think about Drift, you're exactly right. And I think the big thing with Drift is that when they came in, right now they're successful, right? But like, let's rewind the clock a little bit to when they came on the scene. They were not the only chat tool in town, right? Intercom was already on the stage, right? They're another big competitor in the space, and they'd already gained a lot of market share. So traditionally, what people would have done, right, the strategy would have been, we're going to position against Intercom. Unlike Intercom, we have these features and benefits. But what they did was change the conversation altogether, right? They started this idea of conversational marketing, and they changed the conversation away from how are we better than Intercom to we are the only kind of company that allows you to market the way buyers want to market today, right? The world has changed. B2B buyers aren't who they used to be, and we're going to enable that. And by telling this story, instead of comparing themselves to other people, they've done what they've done, which is grow to be one of the most successful examples of technology, launches, B2B SaaS launches in the last 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, another one that is a good example is Salesforce. Salesforce is a really interesting one because they came along and they originally were a CRM, customer relationship management software, and there were other CRMs out there. I interviewed previously the founder of Act Software, which is the first or one of the first CRMs out there. And so, but it was interesting the way they positioned themselves, and to this day position themselves wasn't based on we've got more features and benefits than other CRMs.
Yeah, and you still talk about features and benefits, and I think we can walk folks through how to put this together. But the way Salesforce did this again was they positioned themselves first against a change that was happening in the world, just like Drift, right? And so this is, as we think about how people need to position for a rebound, it's how is the world different for the people that are our best customers, for the people we're trying to service? What are the stakes of that change, right? And then how do I enter into that conversation? So we can use Drift as an example to carry that a little bit further, right? And we can talk about Salesforce as well. So Drift positioned against B2B buyers have changed, right? This change has already happened, right? And there was 3 ways I think that they cite that people have changed. 1, they have more access to information, right? That 68% of the buyer's journey is completed before somebody chooses a vendor. 2, they have more options than ever. And 3, they now expect things 24/7, right? Like whenever they want them, Netflix, Uber, Amazon, etc., right? They want instant gratification. So if you are marketing like it's before, right, using forms, taking a week to follow up, you're missing out on a huge percentage of business, right? They weren't talking about, well, wait, we have the smartest AI, right? They're positioning against the status quo. And that's what we're going to all have to think about as we position products coming out of this next change is what is different for people now and how do we help them understand the stakes of that change and why we're going to be the only one who can help them solve for it.
I think an interesting one related to that, and probably related to number 2, the more options than ever option, is that your competitor used to be down the street or in your local community, and these days it could be on the other side of the globe. It could be, maybe you never anticipated it, but it could be software. The local bookkeeper who previously, had all kinds of local clients and was fearful of other local bookkeepers. Now their competitor isn't that. It could be QuickBooks Online or other software that replaces them.
Well, and if you've put your company, and this is, I believe this to be true in most cases, that if you put your company in a position where they're Googling what you do rather than who you are, right? If you haven't gotten to them and built enough brand that they're not first looking at for who you are rather than what you do, you're already losing the game, right? You need to put people in a position where they're just looking for who you are because they already believe that you're the right solution for them.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you have to start competing on the tactical search, right, now you're immediately getting in a commoditized position.
It's really interesting. So COVID-19 world that we're in, we were talking about this beforehand, and there's been kind of this shared experience of going through this and how the world is changing. Let's talk a little bit more about that and how that's going to affect other companies going forward, how they need to adapt and change.
Yeah, I think it's about thinking about, so starting with your best customers, right? What is different for them now, right? What are the implications of all this? And then thinking about how that intersects with the kinds of things that you do, right? And what are the implications for them? So we can continue with the drift example just because it's something we've already discussed, right? Or even so, like, let's think about what you do, John. I think that's a really great example.
Yeah.
In a post-COVID world, right, you're going to see a decline in events. There's no question about that in the short term, right? You are going to see people who are more reluctant to travel. Yet all of us as business owners need to find a way to make meaningful connections with other buyers, right? That is an imperative. You want to survive and thrive in the new world, you have to make meaningful connections. So what are you going to do? You're not going to cold call people, right? You can only tap your network so many times. How do you add value to the conversation, right? One of the ways is to have a podcast, right? It's no longer a nice to have, it's an imperative to have this channel and way to connect with other people. And let's use it in a traditional positioning, right? You could say, unlike other podcast producers, we have, you know what I mean? Or we are the cheapest podcast producer, or
right.
we are the,
And I think intuitively, for speaking from our experience, we felt like that was the wrong way to position ourselves from the beginning. We didn't want to position ourselves as competing against other companies. In addition to the fact that we add strategy to it, which is a really important piece to it, which most companies don't. But you make a great point. So maybe for many companies, it starts with telling yourself this statement. It's a changed world, and my company is a must have, not a nice to have, for blank reasons. Would that be a good way to start thinking about it?
Yeah, I think the first thing you do is think, how has the world changed? And then to frame this change, it's what are the stakes, right? So using your company as an example, right? Those who find a way to make meaningful digital remote connections are going to thrive, while those people who are still relying on old school tactics, right, who are waiting for events to come back, you're going to die. It's going to take too long, right? So what is the hook there? And then what is the villain? And I think this is really compelling. And you can think about the villain is the thing that stands in the way of change, of them getting that thing that they want. It's, Mucinex uses mucus and personifies that as a villain, right? And in business, it might be for you guys, there's some personification, something standing in the way of change. For Drift, it was forms, right? No one wants to fill out forms and be put into this sales cycle. They just want to have a conversation with people. So what's the change, what's the stakes, and what's the thing standing in the way? And that frames up the problem in a way that makes this an imperative instead of a nice thing that maybe I'll think about later.
That's really interesting. I'm trying to think in our company what the villain is. I mean, it could be either the technology. That's what holds a lot of people back, is understanding the technology and knowing how to make a podcast happen technologically, or looking at the other thing that we do, which is making sure they have the right strategy. So it could be having the right strategy, but I'm not sure if that is a way of articulating a villain. Or it could be like business being built dependent on in-person events, and needing to get on a plane, needing to travel to go to conferences, or needing to network face to face, which are all things that a lot of people don't enjoy doing or want to do less of.
Yeah, and when you think about a villain, I would, first of all, whenever anyone builds their story, I would recommend it to them that as they outline this, they find ways to test this on their best customers, right? There's a variety of ways to do that, but you want to get feedback as you build out your story to understand what feels real to people. Because if you have to convince somebody, the story should feel so obvious once you see it that you go, shit, I do need to do something about this.
Yeah.
If it requires a huge mental leap, then you're losing, right? It should feel so abundantly, like when I say the podcast example, to me, it feels so obvious and real that you can't help but think, man, I need to take some action against this, because if I wait to go back to events, I'm going to be waiting a long time, right? Mm-hmm. So,
and people might go out of business in the interim. Well, that's great. That's a really interesting way of thinking about it. Another company we were talking about beforehand, which you have used as an example, is Zora. Now, this is a company that sells technology that enables companies to sell subscription software. And rather than positioning themselves as having the most subscription features, they position themselves as, we've entered the subscription economy. This change has already happened. If you don't evolve and adapt, like many big companies are, GE, IBM, then you're going to die on the vine. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, they're a great example. And I think, so their simple promise, which is another piece of this framework, right, is turning customers into subscribers. And when you look at their pitch deck, the second slide is, we now live in a subscription economy, right? And it continues on to say every industry is shifting, and that leaders are creating new experiences through a new kind of business model. And they show examples from consumer goods, high tech, education, healthcare, across all sectors, right? And then they set up a change in the stakes here. The best companies have reinvented themselves away from products, right, into subscription businesses. And then they show that in the last 15 years, 52% of Fortune 500 companies have disappeared, right? You think about that statistic if you're trying to think about how you innovate and survive. And then who has survived this extinction? GE, right? They went from light bulbs to digital services. Dollar Shave Club had $1 billion exit, and you can go across categories and see this. So this is where, instead of saying we have the most innovative technology that does this and that, you're changing the story to be about, wow, the world's already shifted. And if I don't figure out how to become a subscription-based business, which, by the way, they now own this term because they've told the story, I'm going to be in a lot of trouble.
That's really interesting. So many companies listening to this are going to have to really think deeply on this one and evaluate whether their positioning is something they've been doing for years and hasn't evolved and changed, and whether it has, whether they have adequately found a new way of positioning themselves in this world as a necessity, as a must-have, not a nice-to-have. Just trying to recap some of the things we've said here.
They're going to know quickly, right? Because either their phone is ringing and then they know, or it is not, and they have a problem. So it's going to be pretty obvious pretty quickly.
Yeah. So just to recap some things here, the goal of modern positioning is to change the status quo. People search for what you do, or people search for you rather than what you do or the thing that you do. Your story should be your positioning. Well, you should be using a story as a positioning statement. It should be a high impact positioning story. And I guess initially as a ground level thing, you should understand whether you have a positioning problem.
Yeah. I think, a final sort of point here is that 95% of buying, and this is not me, this is like Harvard science, is subconscious, right? We make these decisions on a gut level. And whether you're selling software or you're selling, apples or anything in between, people are going to have done the research and they're going to come to these decisions with some gut level reaction. There's nobody has time to really evaluate all of the particulars. And so if you can come up with this story about, why this matters now, and you do it well, you've already won that 95%. And now all you have to do is not lose it at the very end. Whereas if you try to logic them into the decision, which is what comparing features and benefits is, or, trying to find some absolute white space, then you're not going to be effective, because you're not appealing to that subconscious part of people that just emotionally believes the story you're telling and wants it to be true, or needs it to be true, and just leans in on that.
That's great. Brendan, thanks so much for doing this. The name of the book is the 12 Immutable Laws of High Impact Messaging. Spark is the company. Where can people go to learn more about you?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn under my name, Brendan Dell. They can go to the website, www.brendandell.com.
Excellent. All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks, John.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
Revolution.
And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.